Hello and welcome. This is Jennifer and I'm so glad you're here. Today I am revisiting one of your favorite inking techniques. I did a video on this technique a long time ago, and since then I have heard many people say how much they've enjoyed it and they still use this technique. So I thought I would just do a refresher video because it's really fun and easy to do and works great with products you may have. Now this is all about creating color and shine and texture on your cards using a few favorite products and embossing folders. I love this technique so much that I made a bunch of cards to share with you today. We'll first create a bunch of the backgrounds and then turn them into cards. This is something that works great for the holiday cards or non-holiday. All right, for the backgrounds, I'm starting with white cardstock that I've pre-cut to 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches. Any white cardstock should work. I'm taking some Altenew satin tape and putting it around the outside edges, going right up to the edge. This will create a nice margin that will remain uninked, just allowing this technique to stand out more. You could use any type of washi tape for this. You could even use masking paper if you want. You could die cut a rectangle or circle from masking paper and put that down. Totally up to you. Over this open area, I'm applying a heavy amount of Tim Holtz Distress Ink using Tim Holtz Ink Blending Tool. You could use really a lot of different inks here that you may have with different inking tools. I chose to use these inks because I can easily build up color and get a blended look. The nice thing about this particular technique is it's very forgiving. You don't have to have a great blend. You just want to put down as much color as you can, filling in that open area. I will say if you do want a good blend, you want to overlap your colors as much as you can. The more you overlap, the better the blending. All right, once I'm done filling this open area, I will use a dry cloth to wipe the excess ink off of the tape so that I can remove it later and reuse it again. All right, next we need Ranger Perfect Pearls. Any pigment powder should work here. I have 3 different ones here. I have Perfect Pearl, Heirloom Gold, and Sunflower Sparkle. Those are the 3 I chose to use today, but there are lots of color options available. The Perfect Pearl one that I'm using here is the one I use the most because it's kind of a white and it doesn't add color, it just makes it shiny. I'm picking up a little of the pigment powder with a soft brush and rubbing it over the inked area. That somewhat still wet ink will grab a hold of that Perfect Pearl, giving a beautiful shiny result. I do like to take a dry cloth and then buff off some of the excess. You could leave a lot on there, but I like to remove a little bit so that more of the color shows through. So now instead of an inked area, we have a shiny metallic looking inked area. If you don't have pigment powders, you could totally skip that. You could just use the inking alone, or you can try rubbing like a pearly kind of gel or paste over that area. But you would want that to be very thin. Okay, so now that we have removed that tape to save for later, look at that beautiful metallic look at the center of our cardstock. To step this up even more, I'm adding texture to it using embossing folders. Now I'm using my Spellbinders Platinum 6 die cut machine, but most die cut machines will work with embossing folders. You just need to check the instruction manual on what sandwich to use. I am lightly spraying the back side of this inked piece with a tiny bit of water, just a fine mist. I kind of spray the mist in the air and kind of swipe my cardstock through it, trying to get the water to land on the back so I don't mess up the inking on the front. I then put it into an embossing folder and run it through my machine as I follow the instructions. However, sometimes embossing folders have different thicknesses and you have to kind of experiment to see what works. Here I'm trying to figure out what works best with this particular 3D embossing folder. I like to start lighter because we don't want to put too much pressure right from the get-go, and then build up shims. I found if I put a cardstock shim in here, it gave just the right amount of pressure. And look at that beautiful texture. Because we put that Perfect Pearl metallic look in the center, it kind of catches the eye a bit and allows that texture to show even more. Let's do a few more examples, and I have more tips for this technique and ink blending. Here I'm using Lucky Clover and Lumberjack Plaid, so I'm using red and green inks. Normally you wouldn't want to blend those together because where they overlap, it'll turn kind of brown. But I think that's okay because I'm putting a gold perfect pearl over this, which will give it kind of a gold shine, and I think it's beautiful in the end. So you can really experiment with creative ink blends for this technique. So this is the Heirloom gold. You can see it's kind of a brownish gold. It's really beautiful and great for a vintage feel. I then buff away some of the excess and then remove the tape. I like to take the tape and put it off to the side and then wipe the surface of it with a baby wipe so it's clean so that I'll be able to use it again to create another background. Another thing about the Perfect Pearls, these pigment powders have been around for many years. Some of these jars I've had, probably 10 years, 15 years. A little goes a long way. When you go to put the lid on these, I recommend turning it the wrong way till you hear a click, then turn it the right way, and that will give you a secure closure and you don't have to worry about it spilling. Now look at the shine on this piece. I love this kind of vintage Christmas look it has. So let's use a classic embossing folder on it. This is the Graceful Holly. I really like this one. I'll run it through my die cut machine. Just want to experiment to find what sandwich works best with the machine you have. But I'm sure you can figure it out, and then it would work well with most 3D embossing folders. And check out that. I love that. So even though I had that brown overlapping color in the center, it has this gold shine and texture now that I think is beautiful. Okay, on this next inked background, I'm putting on the Sunflower Sparkle pigment powder, and notice I put way too much down on the surface. A little goes a long way. So start with a little and build up. You don't need much. I went overboard here. So I'll have to wipe some of that excess away and look at that beautiful shine you have. This time I'm using an embossing folder and die combo. I love that these are available these days. I think they're so creative and allows you to step up what you do with your cards. So this is the Hedge Berries embossing folder and coordinating die. So I'm misting lightly, very lightly on the back of our inked piece and then putting it into the embossing folder and running it through the die cut machine to apply that pressure. Now there are many ways you can go about using these embossing folders and dies together, but I'm sharing with you what I feel gives the best results. Now I take the die and put it right over that leaf. It lines up with the embossing that you've done, with that texture you've added. It pops over it. And then I take that and I run that through my die cut machine how I normally would with a regular die. That will cut that leaf out of our embossed piece. But when we did that, we also flattened that embossed piece again. So I'm putting the pieces back into my embossing folder, and thankfully they have enough texture that they kind of pop on top of the raised areas of the folder. I will then close the folder and run it back through my machine as I did before to apply that pressure for the embossing folder. So I find it easier to use the embossing folder, then die cut and use the embossing folder again. It gives beautiful results every time. And then we can put this back together lined up nicely. You'll see what I do with that later in this video. As I create another background here, I did want to mention that there are other pigment powders on the market. I'm just more familiar with the Perfect Pearls. I find that they don't rub off when I do this technique, but you can be cautious and do a quick spray with a fixative. I'll link to one below. It's good to have a fixative on hand when you do certain inky techniques, and this is a good case. So I will link to that below. Honestly, I did not use the fixative on these. I think they'll hold up just fine, but you do have that option. For this background, I am again using an embossing folder and die combo. This is a beautiful one. We have the refined Snowflake here. So I'll first put it into the embossing folder. I did do a light mist of water on the back of this inked piece. I'll run it through as an embossing folder to apply that texture. Then I'm taking the dies and just lining them up with the raised texture. It kind of pops in place. And I'll run that through my die cut machine as I normally do with dies. Then I will take these pieces and put them back into the embossing folder, just kind of popping them onto the raised areas of the folder, then running it through as an embossing folder, and now we have these pieces that we can use together with lots of shine and lots of texture. So we'll get back to that background in a moment. I also wanted to mention that you can use different width of tapes for this. This is a Spellbinders tape here, which actually is available in a few different widths. So you can change up how much of an inky area you have there in the middle. You can also, again, cut your own shapes and strips using masking paper. So that's another option. I just find the tape is quick and easy to do. Another tip with this technique, it's fun to do multiple backgrounds at once. I will mask off several backgrounds, ink up several backgrounds, and then apply the perfect pearl to all of them. Once I've wiped off the excess, they're all ready to do with the embossing folder. So you can create a bunch of cards with this technique, and it's a fun way to experiment with different color combos and use your embossing folders over and over again. For the background where I use the red inks and the gold pigment powder on top, I use the Simon Says Stamp Holly Jolly Berries embossing folder. This has such a classic feel to it. The nice thing also about this technique is you can go for a more classic style or a more playful style. It just depends on what you add on top. For the blue inked background, we have the Simon Says Stamp Billow Snowflakes embossing folder and coordinating dies. So I'll do the same process I did before of using the embossing folder, die cutting, and then using the embossing folder again. I'm trying to demonstrate with as many embossing folders as I can today, just so you can see all of the different looks that you get. Because we add that shine to the inked area, when you tilt it in the light, you see more of that texture, more of that embossing folder pattern. So it really steps it up. Look at these beautiful pieces that we can put back together on a card a little bit later in this video. And then one last one with the inked off area in the center here, using that same embossing folder, but this time I skipped the die cutting. All right, now you don't have to stick with just inking up an area in the center of your card. Here I am inking up most of a background. I plan to put a die cut border along the bottom. So this is definitely a technique that you can do on an entire background. Really, the sky is the limit with this technique. If you want to save time, you could also just mask off an area and then spray with Tim Holtz Distress Mica sprays, which provide color and shine. Let that dry and then use an embossing folder. Totally up to you, and it just depends on the supplies that you have. Okay, on this finished background, I'm again using the refined Snowflake embossing powder, but skipping the die cutting this time, and we have a great backdrop for a border die cut. Before we move on to making the cards, I just wanted to show a few more backgrounds I created and which embossing folders I used. This is one of those, again, where I like to sit down and make a bunch of backgrounds at once. Then you could add the sentiments at the same time, or just save the background. And next time you need a quick card for a particular occasion, you can add whatever sentiment you want. And this works all year round. Here is a floral background that I created with the same technique. This doesn't just have to be for the holidays. That shine will work anytime. And the best part is you can keep the rest of this card very simple. I will say what I think is the best type of embossing folder to use with this technique is something with a geometric pattern. Because of the shine that we're adding, look at how it catches the light. So it really enhances the geometric pattern nicely. All right, so now that we have a bunch of backgrounds ready to go, let's create our cards. I have some more tips and techniques to share as we go. With a technique like this, you really don't need to add much else to it. You have shine and texture, so it really is often best to keep it simple. So I have a Just a Note sentiment here that I've cut from white cardstock, and I'm putting gold for the top layer. You'll see in the middle there, I have a bunch of these die cuts assembled, most that are white layers of cardstock. That way I have them ready, and when I have a card to make, I can just cut one layer of whatever color I want for my card. Here I'm using gold matte cardstock from Simon Says Stamp. I can put that on top, and then I'm ready to add it to my card. So I find it's a huge time saver to have some sentiments ready to go like this. You'll see me do this again later in the video. So for this particular card, I kept it very simple, but we have lots of texture and shine, thanks to this really easy technique. Here's another very clean and simple, fast card where I just added a die cut sentiment to it. I did stamp also on the matching envelope. I used the Simon Says Stamp Stamped with Love stamp set. I really like this one. It's going to be a new favorite of mine. Really like some of the messages in here. Great to stamp on the envelope or on the back of your card. Now back to the card, I used the Simon Says Stamp Handwritten Hello dies. I cut the word hello from black cardstock and the shadow die from white cardstock, glued those together and added it to the card. I didn't feel a need to add anything else thanks to that fun background. Here's another simple one. This time I used the Simon Says stamp You Are My Joy die set. I cut You Are My Joy 3 times from white cardstock, glued each of those die cuts together, and then added it to the center of our card, and also added a few glitter gemstones. Now look closely at this background. I did this one upside down. I did the embossing folder backwards so that instead of having a raised texture, it's kind of indented. So it's just another way to change up how you use your folders. Here's one more simple card, then we'll step things up. On this one, I used the Peace on Earth script die. I cut that twice from white cardstock, once from gold cardstock, and glued those together and added to the card. I also added some gold gemstones, and I really like how the gold cardstock really pulls out that gold shine that we have on our red inked area. If you're looking for a way to kind of step up what you add to this card, I recommend using vellum die cuts. Here I have die cut some little berry images from vellum. I love these dies. Now the die actually makes little berries too, so you can cut maybe the stems from green, the berries from red, and assemble them. But what I chose to do was to just cut from vellum and then add my own gemstones for the berries. I laid those vellum die cuts onto my card, and then I'm putting this large joy layered die cut right on top. The glue on the back of the joy will actually hold those vellum die cuts in place. I'm also putting tiny dots of liquid adhesive behind the berries on the vellum die cut. Then I put a drop on top of the berries on the vellum die cut, and I can add my gemstones. That way the additional glue behind this area, the vellum, is hidden behind these gemstones that I'm adding. Now I do recommend using a strong liquid adhesive. What I use here is Gina K Connect, and I've put it in a fine tip bottle. I'll have both of those linked below. I cannot recommend those enough. They are incredible. So here you can see we still have lots of that shine and texture showing, but we have the added interest of the vellum berries and gemstones. On this next card, I added a few extra die cuts also, but I kept it very simple. In this case, I used the Simon Says stamp Peace, Love, Hope, Joy die. I cut that twice from white cardstock and once from gold matte cardstock, glued those together and added them right into the center of the inked area. I then used the Simon Hurley Floral Stag die set. It has some small holly die cuts in there. I cut those from gold cardstock also and added them in 3 spots around the sentiment, along with a few red gemstones for a pop of color. So this has a really classic holiday feel to it, and I think this would be a really special one to send out to loved ones. Okay, now let's step it up a bit more and create cards that use these backgrounds, but get a little more creative with how. Now this one is a background that I made off screen using different colors of blue and purple distress inks. You can see I only masked a little bit around the edge, just enough to tape it onto my table as we inked it and added the perfect pearls on top. I then used the refined Snowflake embossing folder. Now I'm adding a white snowflake frame on top of that. I had cut this 3 times from white cardstock, glued those 3 layers together, and now I'm adding it onto our inked and shiny background. I'm going to give that some time to dry. While it's drying, I'm using the Spellbinders Glimmer machine to do a foiled sentiment. This is the Simon Says stamp CZ Design Joyful Hot Foil Plate. I'm taping it onto my paper, creating a little hinge, and sliding some foil underneath it. I will then tape that in place to make sure it stays put, flip it all over, and put it onto my hot Glimmer machine. I'll put the plates on, press the timer button. When the light stops flashing, I take all of those platform and plates out and run it through my die cut machine to apply pressure. The Glimmer machine applies the heat, the die cut machine applies the pressure. You'll just have to see what machine works with the particular die cut machine you have. All right, now we'll take this off and we have beautiful blue foiled joyful sentiment. This joyful hot foil plate coordinates with this joyful die set. In the die set, you have the word joyful itself and the shadow die. I'm using the shadow die to cut out the foil plate. I like that you have the options of using the die or the foil plate. To give this joyful sentiment some strength and dimension, I die cut the joyful shadow die 2 more times from white cardstock, and I'm gluing that behind the foiled sentiment. Then I will glue all of this onto the bottom right of our card. I also used the Simon Says stamp Simple Holiday Greetings to stamp wishes, and I cut that out and put that right below joyful. I did off screen add a few white pearls just for a little added shine, and check out that background. Putting that perfect pearl on top of that ink blending really adds so much to this card. Pigment powders are relatively inexpensive and last a long time. There's many other ways you can use them. In fact, I'll link to a video up here on the top right with another way to use perfect pearls, but this time with a spray. Okay, now let's go on to our cards where I die cut part of the embossed background out. We're going to assemble it all together again. I start by taking the negative space piece, and I'll put adhesive on the back of it and glue it to a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding white note card. That's what I did for all of today's cards. I do recommend using a strong liquid adhesive when adding embossing folded backgrounds to your cards. Because there's so much up and down dimension, you want to make sure it gets in the nooks and crannies and makes very good contact with your card to stay put. I don't recommend a tape runner for that. Now here I have die cut 4 of that little leaf or that branch die cut from white scraps of cardstock, and I'm gluing those together for dimension. These will get glued to the back of our inked and textured die cut, as you see I'm doing here. So it'll have some dimension behind it and make it pop out from the background so it stands out more. I then will glue this layered die cut into the opening of the negative space, and look at that, how it pops out but has a subtle look to it still. Now here I use the Simon Says stamp Rejoice die. It comes with a shadow die, but I just use the word Rejoice alone. I cut it 3 times from white cardstock, glued the layers together, and then glued it onto our card. I really like the eclipse kind of look that you get with that die cut in the center. If you do want it to stand out more, you could do layers of black cardstock behind the inked and textured die cut, and then that would give more definition. Totally up to you. Next up, we have the background where we die cut out the snowflakes, and now we're going to put them back in just like we did on this last example. This time I'm gluing the negative space onto a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch note card that I made out of Simon Says stamp fog cardstock. I have trimmed my background down to be slightly smaller, so you see a bit of that gray on the outside edge. Now here I am stacking up my snowflakes, so doing 3 or 4 white die cuts behind the inked and textured snowflake. That way we have that dimension and it pops out from our background. I'll do this for all 3 of our snowflakes and pop them right into place into the openings on the background of our card. For a sentiment, I chose to use hello, so this will be a winter card that I can send out, but not necessarily for the holidays. I am again using the Simon Says stamp Handwritten Hello, which is a favorite of mine. You can see I have lots pre-die cut over there in the baggie, so it saves me time as I'm crafting. I cut the shadow from white and I cut the word hello from black and glued those together. I did layer up die cuts because I want it to be strong, because we're putting it over some dimension on the card, so we want it to hold up as it goes through the mail. For a little sentiment strip underneath, I used a CZ Design stamp set to stamp Sending Cozy Hugs. I'm using foam tape and liquid adhesive to add this over our textured background. And finally, I added a few gemstones for additional sparkle. Check out all of that shine, that color, the texture, the dimension. This is a really fun card to pull together. This next card I assembled in the same way, using the backgrounds that we created earlier in this video. I used the Joyful this time. Remember how there were the dies and the hot foil plate? This time I used the dies. I cut the word Joyful from silver glitter cardstock and glued it onto a shadow die cut that I created from white cardstock and glued that to the bottom center of the card, and also added some silver glitter gemstones. Remember earlier we created a background using this technique where we inked and used perfect pearls on most of the background, and then we used the embossing folder. Now it's time to add that die cut border along the bottom and turn it into a card. I used the Simon Says stamp Pine Landscape die and embossing folder. I cut from white cardstock the border, and I placed that into the coordinating embossing folder. And check out the texture that you get to this die cut. Absolutely beautiful. I glued that right onto our inked and textured background, and then added the Rejoice die cut from white cardstock. For even more sparkle, you can see those stars in the sky there. Those are from Trinity stamps. They're called Oh My Stars. They're holographic, so they catch the light wonderfully. I really like that this card was fast to make once I had my background created. I just added the die cuts and we're good to go. I did stamp a sentiment to the inside of my card. This is the Simon Says Stamp All Ye Faithful set. Has great sentiments in it. Wonderful for the front of cards or the inside of cards too. I have a couple backgrounds that I have left to use, but I ran out of time to do so in this video, so I thought I'd mention my plans for them. For this snowflake textured background, I'm using the Simon Says Stamp Amelia Snowflake. I cut that from white cardstock and I'll glue it to the top center of the card and then do a sentiment right across the center of it. A sentiment strip would be perfect here, which would allow all of that shine and texture to show around the snowflake. And last but not least, on this green and blue kind of geometric background, I'll use the Simon Says Stamp Holiday Stack die. I plan to cut that from white cardstock, lay the negative space over my card, glue the letters into the openings of the negative space, then remove the negative space, and I'll have this tree of sentiments made of white die cuts right on top of that ink and shine. Before we go, I wanted to show you a few other embossing folder and die sets that would be great for this technique. For this one and the next one, this is the antique lamp, I would do the inking over the entire background along with the perfect pearls. Then do the embossing folder. You could even pop out certain areas with the dies. And then you would have a beautiful textured background, and all you have to do is add a simple sentiment. And again, you could do the same with this country church. If you would like to just do this technique on die cuts alone, you could use the Simon Says Stamp Gifted Holiday or the next set I'll show you. This has the folder and coordinating dies. So you could ink up the piece, add perfect pearls, use the die to cut out the piece, and then use the embossing folder. And use that one die cut on your card. It'll have lots of shine and texture. All right, so there you have it. Lots and lots of ideas for an oldie but goodie technique. I really hope you'll give it a try. I had a lot of fun making these. If you are interested in the supplies I used today, I link everything in my YouTube description below. At the end here, I'll link to a couple other related videos, including the one that I did a long time ago, so there's more ideas there. Thanks for watching. We'll see you soon.